Poddin My Noggin, hosted by CK Sims, creating a platform to elevate, educate, and heal by creating a space where people can share their stories of struggle, triumph, and redemption. CKS Media.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Poddin My Noggin. This week, we are joined by author Kath Essing. You're much more than an author, but it's a good segue, if you will. I apologize in advance. I have a puppy who is, I don't know if you can hear her, but she's so she likes to wait until I am on a podcast or a meeting to start barking at things because I'm not paying attention to her. But okay, welcome to the show, Kath. It's a pleasure to have you here. And I am inspired by your story. I will tell you right off the cuff that I am a feminist. I don't know when that particularly happened or how that came to be, or if I just always was. It's just something that never made any sense to me, that women weren't treated equal or were treated very differently, for one. And so to me, anybody who's out there empowering women and being strong in the face of adversity, I tend to gravitate towards just naturally. So you have a story. So like we'll summarize first. So you wrote a book 10-ish years ago.
Yes.
And that was called Journey to Self.
That's
and then
correct.
Your most recent book is called The Courage to Speak Your Truth. And now you also help people with that, but we're going to talk about that later. But that particular framework, that situation is called shifting or shift the narrative.
Shifting the narrative, yes.
Shifting the narrative. Perfect. So tell us about you. Tell us about, like, what's your story? Bring us back to before the first book. How did life sort of preempt you to write a book?
Well, I had a great childhood and I was in my early 20s, and all of a sudden it was like a tsunami of emotion that overtook me, and I couldn't make sense of what was happening in my mind, in my body, and in my life. And so it prompted me to get some assistance from a mental health perspective. And what came from that was the uncovering and unearthing of childhood sexual abuse memories. So then I took the next 10 years to really make sense of how that calibrated with a very strong, outspoken feminist, as you said, and how that piece of the puzzle fitted into the broader understanding of who I believed I was. And it shifted everything. It shifted how I saw myself. It shifted how I saw others around me. And then in more recent years, it shifted how I see the society as a whole and how we are shaming and silencing so many people in our communities. And so that really is what prompted me to write this book. I'm now a mother of 2 children, and I want to create change for their generation so that kids know that they can speak up, and also that we can just create a more equitable world for everyone to have a voice. So that's my drive now. Your puppy doesn't need help speaking up.
No, she does not. Go be quiet now. We'll play after. You want to come up and you're going to be quiet that way? Okay, perfect. You stay there for now. So I want to go back real quick because, like, I find this, it's often a trend with trauma survivors that they block out whole sections, whole memories of their lives as children and grow up, and then only to later to actually uncover the truth, to not understand what's happening to them. And what I find fascinating about that is a child's ability, like resilience to survive. And do you think, from your experience and from what you're doing right now with the work that you're doing, do you think that it's a lack of language for children to be able to speak up, like to be able to name what it is that's happening to them? Is it
It's
fear?
Well, I think, if we take it back to basics of, and every situation is different, so I can only speak to my own. I am a trained psychotherapist too, so I understand how the brain does react to trauma. And so if we take it back to the basic fundamentals of responding to a scary thing by fight, flight, or freeze. And so in my case, I disassociated when I was in a situation of danger. And so I literally just left my body. So when the memories then surfaced, they were fragmented. So the memories were somewhat stuck in my body because an element of myself had left because I didn't want to be in that situation. This is really true for a lot of children who are trauma survivors, and a lot of people that I've spoken to have had similar experiences. So, as I said, it's different for everybody, and it's certainly not my level of expertise. But for my situation, it took years to put the pieces of the puzzle back together because I disassociated, which is a common psychological response for children. As you said, because they don't have the language and they don't have the understanding. 90% of the time, children are abused by someone that they know, and 50% of the time, it's a family member. So not only do children not have the language, but they don't have the context to understand, that this person that we should be able to trust is able to harm them in this way. So I think, even as an adult, we find that concept pretty unbelievable. So how could we expect a child to make sense of that in the moment?
One of the most powerful and impactful things a therapist has ever told me is that when you're a child, I've said this before on the podcast, when you're a child, your family, usually your parents or uncles or whoever, whatever the situation may be, these are people who are responsible for your care, like providing you house, home, food, clothing, all of those things. As children, when someone who you love is harming you, it's almost impossible for them to be able to understand, to conceptualize that they are the monster as they look inward and convince themselves that they're the monster. Mm-hmm. And I think from a traumatic childhood experience point of view, like it's just survival and resiliency. And I wasn't abused, but I did have a blocked memory. It came out of great Christian shame at like 15 years old. And it only flooded back to me when I was driving with a friend in a car when I was 30 years old. And I just mind boggled that was blocked for so long. So you were going through life. I love how you started that conversation off with the fact that you had a wonderful childhood, mm-hmm. right? And then in your 20s, you came into all these emotions. And then through therapy, you uncovered that you were sexually abused. And it took you 10 years to sort of put that puzzle together to figure out how who Kath was mm-hmm. with this trauma. And go ahead.
Yeah. And absolutely who I was. But as I said, it shifted the kind of narrative on what I understood about the world around me. And I think I'm still making sense of that. And the more people that disclose to me and the more I understand about the prevalence of abuse, the more I'm trying to make sense of what this culture that we exist in actually looks like. And, you said you're a feminist, and I would say, absolutely, I align with feminist views, but I'm really more about how can we make this world safer and more equitable for everybody, regardless of gender and race and sexuality and religion. And for me, the statistics are 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys. I have so many men disclosing to me that have never told anyone. So I really, I disagree with those statistics. And I think that, I'm a mother of a son and a daughter, and I feel really passionate about ensuring that both of them grow up to be kind humans and to advocate for themselves and other people. And I think once we start to look at gender in that way, that's where we'll make the change. But if we don't involve men in the conversation about women's rights, then nothing will ever change. And
I love how you put that. And I think, yes, perhaps just coming out and saying feminist doesn't really do it justice, because I am a feminist without a question. But one of the things that I support as much as feminism is men being able to learn how to express their feelings, to move through their emotions, to hold space for it, for this toxic stigma of articulating what your emotions are to just go away. And I recognize that from a very young age, infancy really, boys are fed a narrative that it is weak to cry. It is weak to show emotion. You need to man up, boy up, toughen up. Like in my day, yada, like, you know what the rhetoric is, right? And then we get these men who are now adults with money and jobs and all of those things, and they're struggling. A lot of men are struggling in this world. And people are often too dismissive because they're men. But the way you said that is beautiful, because it really does. You need to include both genders, all of the people that are going to be affected, to truly make progress. Because you can't do one without, like you said, including the other.
And if we look at, feminine and masculine energy existing within both men and women, then it is the feminine energy in men that's also being impacted by the toxic masculinity that we are exposed to, and by power and disparities that are occurring in our world today. So and until women are encouraged to empower themselves with the masculinity that exists within them, and men are empowered to be vulnerable and allow that, feminine energy to come up, then there won't be equity. And so we have to then undo this narrative around what it is to be male and female. And the reason I think this links into the issue of abuse, which I talk about in my book, is at the end of the day, the decision makers in the legal system and the privilege of power is what is allowing this epidemic to be maintained, and that's where it has to be undone.
Absolutely. And I think we see that right across the board, right? Just with abuse in general. We need more people in power who are not just going to speak against abuse, but are going to act against abuse when their buddy or their college friend or their pastor has abused someone, right? It has to be, people need to be held accountable on all accounts when this happens. And it's the sweeping under the rug, I think, that has caused this epidemic to fester and grow and be what it is today. When you took the 10 years, it was the 10 years to write the first book, Journey to Self?
The first book I published 10 years ago, and that was basically a summary of the program I was taking women through at the time in my business. And I guess that I realized that the more I was working with women, the more conversations we were having that was the same, and the struggles that were the same. So I got really passionate about how can I make a broader impact. The book that I've just written, The Courage to Speak Your Truth, Shifting the Narrative on Childhood Sexual Abuse, is a memoir. It's a very private exploration of my remembering, reporting, and recovering from childhood sexual abuse as an adult. The reason that I feel passionate about sharing this story is because when I went through the process of going through the legal system, I didn't find a lot of resources that helped me. And, I have a very beautiful, supportive family and an insane amount of friends who were there to support me, but they didn't know how to help. And it's a very complicated scenario. They didn't know what I needed. I didn't know what I needed, so it was difficult to ask for that. So I really wanted to encapsulate my journey in a way that helped survivors and also helped those that were supporting those survivors. And the feedback that I've got from the book is that a lot of people have found that it's been a bridge between themselves and a brother or sister that has endured abuse but never quite had the language to share with them what their journey looked like. So I'm very proud of that, and I'm very grateful that it's opening a conversation up. A lot of my work that I'm doing now is working in the corporate sector to help individuals learn to advocate for themselves and others. And the numbers of harassment in the workplace almost mirror the numbers that I see in childhood abuse, and it's the same abuse of power. So when we're all walking into a workplace with our stories still ingrained in us and that we haven't really become aware of, then we're then playing out these scenarios in our workplaces, and that's impacting productivity and relationships within our everyday working lives.
So I'm not voyeuristic at all, and I don't like sensationalism. It's probably why I have this saying that I'm not super successful with a podcast, because I'm kind of boring and focus on kindness and things like that. For people who are at home, because you're not the first person to tell me that they had a lot of emotional distress and then it uncovered something that they had deeply buried away. Do you talk about in the book when you discovered, when these memories flooded back? And my question to you is, now I want to read your book, but my question to you is, I know how that one sort of shameful experience, it's a very small period of time, happened in the car, okay? Unprovoked, just happened. Your abuse, was it more than one time? Was it a period of a longer period of duration? And then when you're in therapy, you're having these conversations. Did it just show up one day and flood, or were there memories that came out through a period of time? Like, I always find this really fascinating, because people, like, if a listener was listening and they're experiencing some of those things that made you go to therapy, right? What could they potentially expect? And it's not going to be the same, because everybody's different. We know that's cut.
It's not going to be the same. And I often use the analogy, like when people say, how do I grieve? How do I heal? And it is like grieving. It's like there's no linear process that is a one size fits all. In my case, the depression came knocking, and there was a heaviness in my body, and there was a disconnect between myself. And so I started with therapy, and I had a couple of sessions with a therapist that my mum helped organise. And it was through those sessions that the first incident of abuse came up. It took years and more therapy and a variety of modalities to make sense of that first session, that first incident, which happened when I was 5 years old. Over years, I then found there was another incident when I was 8, and then a final incident when I was 11. The reason that I chose to go to police when I did was that when I had my daughter, the age that she was then became a mirror for the abuse that I endured at that stage in my life. Through my research, this is very common for parents. And because the incident that happened when I was 11 was the most traumatic, I really wanted to ensure that every part of my being was empowered to navigate that time so that it didn't impact myself or impact her or our relationship. So that was really how long it took. And, and I feel very certain that I have the pieces of the puzzle that I need. Do I have a complete picture? No. Do I need a complete picture? No, because there's a sense of peace in me now that my inner child has been heard, she's been seen, I have given her the pieces of the puzzle that she needs to feel at peace. And so now I can navigate life from a perspective that when I see my children, I am seeing them and their needs. I am not seeing them as a reflection of me and my needs. And so as a parent, that is all that matters to me. right now, that I feel congruent and happy, and that my kids are allowed to be them. And I see them for that as opposed to a reflection of myself.
Before we had to break, I know that you went through legal channels.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find any form of success in that endeavor?
Success being that it was poetic justice. I got a chance to confront my abuser. And until I did that, I didn't realize how much I needed to. When the police first said, well, let's, see if he's still alive, it never occurred to me that he wouldn't be. And so then I got quite frightened that maybe I'd missed my mirror of opportunity. It was a very harrowing, challenging thing, confronting him, but it was the most liberating, and it's how I reclaimed my voice. So although the investigation didn't have enough to proceed to trial, I was advised that in the beginning that only 23% of people they believe projected ever come forward about their abuse. From that 23%, only 10% will end up in a trial situation. And from that, only 1% will ever end in a conviction. So I was told that very early in the investigation. So I guess I became very clear about the objective being about my healing more so than about the justice for this individual. He got arrested and his name is now on file. So that feels important to me. And if anyone else was to ever come forward, then I would be in a position to help them with their investigation. But historical abuse claims are very difficult to prove. There was an eyewitness who refused to come forward for her own reasons that I totally respect. And there was no evidence of the hospital records when I was taken to emergency at 11. So without that evidence, it was very complicated. But as I said, for me, it was about speaking up. That was the part of the puzzle that was important. And I hadn't found people talking publicly about the fact that the investigation didn't proceed to a conviction. And I think it's a really important conversation to have, because without all of this knowledge, how can the police ever make any distinction about who they should be looking for in our communities that could be a danger to children? So the silence and the shame is what is allowing these perpetrators to continue perpetrating.
It's very powerful. We're going to be right back.
Partner today with CK Sims and Poddin My Noggin to get in front of an audience that cares. You will be supporting mental health stories, tales of resilience, and uplifting content, aligning your brand with bringing goodness, authenticity, and kindness front and center. This spot could be yours. Do you have a story of struggle and resilience? One that you want to share with others and possibly help someone through their own struggles? Find the link in the show description and fill out the guest form today.
Welcome back, everybody. Before the break, we have been talking to Kath Essing, author and a psychotherapist, and a woman on a mission to educate and elevate women's voices and being able to speak their truth. Right before the break, you were talking about the silence being, probably one of the number one things that allow perpetrators to continue to perpetrate abuse. For people at home, for myself, what are there things or signs or tells that friends of family or other family members would be on the lookout for in smaller children, adolescent children, that sort of thing, that could prompt them to ask? Because are there sort of things like that?
Well, childhood's a difficult, challenging, and as a parent, there are so many phases children go through. So I think the greatest defense we have as parents is to have open conversations with our children very early and educate them on the fact that they should have autonomy over their body and their choices. And in my generation, my parents didn't know that was a conversation they needed to have with me. We were very much taught about stranger danger, and it was never a conversation about the fact that someone close to us could be the person that we could mistrust. And so I think for me, it's a very complex answer and it haunts me as a parent, because our children will be impacted by so many things they navigate in childhood: friendships, whether they like their teacher, whether they're picked for a particular team, whether they get to play the position in that team. So, it's an emotional time. I was a happy kid. There wouldn't have been any signs for my family to see, and that's quite frightening. But one of the responses of trauma is also fawn, which is, I played the good girl, I looked after everybody else. And I think that's what my abuser and manipulated me into silence, because I didn't want to hurt anybody by sharing this information, and I wanted to be seen as a good girl. So that's kind of frightening. I don't think that there is a straight answer to that question. My response as an adult survivor is to ensure my children know my story, that they know they can talk to me about anything that makes them feel uncomfortable. And I feel like that is the main defense we have. Obviously there's relationships that we can look for that don't feel right. There's definitely been times where there's been families that I've gently swayed away from spending time with, because something in my gut just told me that that was the right thing for my kids. So I guess you just have to be really clear on your own instincts and teach your children to be clear too.
So for someone who, say, currently has a child,
Mm-hmm.
and they're hearing this for the first time, right? And they're not really sort of dialed into this particular narrative. We know it happens. Like, we know the stats are probably slightly askew because of so much silence and people not reporting. So it's probably a lot more than what the stats actually say. How would you bridge that conversation if you were just learning about this right now? How would you encourage somebody, a parent who could be listening to this podcast or any of the other podcasts that you have been on, read your book even? How could you encourage that sort of exchange?
Firstly, educate yourself on the issue, and then absolutely ensure that you have enough presence to notice changes in your children. But I've had people come and see me speak or read my book and sit their kids down, and they didn't know that it was a conversation they needed to have. So the conversations that I've had with my children have been about, sometimes adults are not the people that you should be, not all adults are people that you should be trusting. And I know that my children have done things through kindergarten and primary school where they've had to name the very safe people in their lives that they can talk to. And it might just be one very safe person. It might be their mother, or it might be their father. But to be able to ensure that they have a safe place to go. And for some children who don't have a safe home, that might end up being a teacher. It might end up being, a grandparent. The challenging part about the conversation is that we never quite know whom may be a risk to our children. There's statistics that tell us that so much abuse is happening between children now. So that's also another conversation that needs to be integrated. So really, I think for me, it's been about, if you are ever anywhere and there's a feeling in your belly that tells you that something's not right, if that's with a person or in a scenario, then trust that. And so teaching your children to really have that ingrained sense of self, and knowing that they deserve to be able to speak up about something that makes them feel uncomfortable, whether that's something small, and you practice with the small things, so that then when you get to be in your teenage years where it becomes much more important, then they've already had practice doing that.
I love when I see examples of parents teaching their children bodily autonomy, and respecting boundaries. There's something about that just makes me almost excel stress, I guess. It's hard to articulate, but like when I see a child who can firmly state, I don't feel like being touched right now, right? And I've seen this, you've seen examples on social media and little kids and things like that, being able to form those words and say that to someone and then have that be respected. There's something about it that just really like warms me. I think it's super powerful, and I love the concept of having those conversations and teaching children about abuse and the different forms of abuse as well, and how just like tell somebody and how to protect themselves, and do what needs to be done.
And there's so much knowledge about this, and it's definitely not my lane. I can speak to this conversation as a parent, but as a parent, my recommendation is to do the research and to find people that are in this world of advocacy that are talking specifically to parents about keeping their children safe. The conversation that I'm having over and over is about helping adult survivors make sense of what's happened to them. That's where I can speak to from authority, and I want people to understand that no matter how old they are, no matter how big or small their story is, that speaking up and finding the courage to do so is a pathway to a more peaceful existence for them.
And you're doing this through your framework, Shifting the Narrative, correct? Let's talk about that.
So my framework is one that I work with organisations around self-advocacy and advocating for others. So this is about finding your voice within yourself first, understanding what your inner dialogue and your belief system is telling you about yourself and the world around you. And it's not until we start there and we give people the permission to go there that we can actually even look at how each of us play a part in feeding that external narrative back and perpetuating the same stories over and over. So when we look at cultures within organizations, they're like micro cultures of an example of a bigger experience we're having in our broader society. So when we give people the autonomy to speak up and share their stories and understand their own biases and how they're interpreting the world around them, one of the stories that I share is I worked in the mining sector, and there was a day when I was on a run and a car full of men followed me. And so I had to hide in a stranger's front yard. And I was shaken by that. When I went back to my colleagues and I told them these men were kind, respectful men, and their response at the time was, "Oh, Kath, we should have warned you. You can't run here. If you're going to run again, you need to take one of us." Now, at the time, because I felt seen and heard by these men and validated, I didn't take it any further. And it wasn't actually till I wrote my book and I put that story in there that I looked back at how we had collectively accepted that that was okay. And I think we do that often. And so that wasn't the organization's fault. It wasn't my fault. And it wasn't the men that I worked with. It was that we didn't have a collective understanding that there was another way we could have responded to that situation. And I think that happens time and time again. Until I empowered myself and spoke up, I didn't even know that was an option for me at the time.
From my own experience, what you're describing is paramount. Looking within, finding out your core values, your belief system, internal dialogue's a big one. And how that totally impacts everything that you do externally. And so you're working with organizations to promote advocacy, self-advocacy, if you will, but you're also working with individuals to, like, adult survivors of abuse, to find their...
No, so my book is my advocacy lane. So my book is called The Courage to Speak Your Truth, and it's my evidence that I know how to. So I've written this book for people as a resource. I advocate in that world, I speak on stage, and I donate my time to having these conversations. but fundamentally in the workforce, I work on ensuring that individuals who don't have a voice are enabled an opportunity to speak. And I do this to help the organisations minimise their harassment numbers and to ensure inclusivity. So I guess it's like the two parts of my world combined. They both fit under the umbrella of being able to advocate for oneself. And my book is about how I did that for me.
Okay. And the trajectory for the work that you're doing right now. So like if we remove the book for a second,
Mm-hmm.
was the trajectory to do that encouraged by the therapy you received in your 20s, and was it sort of laid the groundwork for that path?
Absolutely. And so did the book. So the pouring out of my story and the sharing of my story from stage and having people read it has been so liberating, because there is nothing there. I have nothing to hide. It was like, I describe it as, it was like a brick wall between myself and others. And until I pulled it down, I didn't even realize that there was a bridge behind it that could allow the story to be something that connected me with other people in a way that it does now. So I think people feel that authentically. It was a journey to find my voice, and I now see everywhere around me. So being a trained psychotherapist, a master in NLP, I use all of these skills within my trainings for one-to-many groups so that I can help facilitate change within organisations. Some of that does involve working one-on-one with leaders, but fundamentally, the framework is what I introduce to organisations so that they can then have the change ongoing when I leave, so that the people are empowered to continue the work, because I was sick of doing 1 hour trainings just to tick a box. I want to get into organisations and really help create lasting change.
How did you make that shift and find that like success in that market?
Well, it became about really living by example, that ensuring that this story wasn't holding me back was about being able to share it totally unapologetically, and also having an understanding and shifting the conversation around it, that this does not define me, that we all walk into a workplace with a story. We don't leave it at the front door when we go into work every day. But sometimes what is our greatest fear is actually the thing that propels us to be most successful, can be our driver. So I think when we start to ask people to put those things aside, we're also asking them to leave behind so many skills and abilities to really create change that could help our organisation. So, it's been a checkered professional life that I've had, and it's like all the dots have just come together at this time to really ensure that change is possible for us all.
Well, I just love the concept of what you're doing as well. Like, people spend such a significant amount of time, a third of their life almost, at work. And so it is an important place, and it should be a safe place, at least, that you can be authentically you. So to know that you're doing that, so that you're actually going into these workplaces, spending the time helping to create a new culture, facilitate change, create a space where people can advocate for themselves, find their voice, and then avoid retaliation. Mm-hmm. So often it's just clicking for me right now. It's the fear, but what I'm realizing is that retaliation is the same kind of tactic, the manipulation that abusers use to keep people silent.
It is, and equally, if we look at workplaces as ecosystems, that leaders are the judicial system that actually want to create change, that if we're not communicating what we're experiencing to those leaders or to those police, then change can never occur. So as an organisation, if we are not empowering our people to speak up, then the shame and silence is able to fester and create damage within our organisations that we have no awareness of. So it becomes like a mirror to what can happen in smaller families, and it's all the same. It's mirroring. The statistics are very similar. I know in the mining sector, I think 33% of women have endured sexual harassment, but up to 69% of those have never come forward. And so a lot of the statistics mirror what's happening with abuse in childhood, because I think a lot of people are entering the workplace already not having a voice. They haven't learned how to set boundaries, and then that's playing out into a bigger, more distorted environment. And so where do we start? I don't have the answer, but I'm choosing to, create some change one, team at a time, and trust that, that will start to perpetuate.
What's interesting too, what I was just thinking, or just came to me as you were talking, was we don't have the voice when we go into the workforce. We haven't found it yet, period, in life. And then often we have those loud ones, the ones who have found their voice and who can advocate for themselves and do. And then we sit and we watch how others react to that. And it's typically, this, I'm thinking of a woman because I've seen it before, who's a bit loud, not afraid to say what's on her mind and fight for what's right and for her piece of that pie. And it seems almost like it agitates those around her, leadership, her peers, direct reports and stuff like that. So that doesn't help either when we don't have our voice. But then when we see it, we shy away from it because we're like, what is that? But
well, I think that part of also, that in my journey of advocating for myself, it was a messy process, and there were a lot of relationships that had to be healed because I didn't go about every step of my healing with eloquence. It was like, healing's messy, and it was disruptive to many of my very close relationships. And part of that I had to take ownership for. So I think that, I come from a place of that speaking up is important, but understanding the needs of people around us is also important. So the part of the advocating is also being able to advocate for others, and sometimes practicing for standing up to bad behavior that we see other people endure is our pathway to doing that for ourselves. And once we get good at being able to identify what the needs of other people around us are, then we can feed into ensuring that our own needs are met. So, advocacy for me isn't just about I need to win and get everything I need. It's about fairness and inclusion and equity. And that's the place that I teach it from. So, yes, there's people that appear to be able to advocate for themselves, but really that's a trauma response for them, that because they're desperate to be heard, because fundamentally they're not listening to themselves. So, that can also be something that can be identified through the process.
Very powerful stuff. And I think for me, I'm having moments of, for years and years, I was the person who would advocate for other people and would be emboldened to stand up and speak up on their behalf. But if you were to flip it around and it was me having to stand up for myself or advocate for myself, that was like the most absurd thing I could ever imagine. And it would be vomit-inducing and anxiety-ridden, right? And I've gotten there now where I can advocate for myself, but it's just interesting how you laid out like the different sort of pathways that people can get to where they can self-advocate. So this is shifting the narrative. You're working with corporations and organizations in the mines. That scares me just because it's the mines, period. So, and you've written your book, The Courage to Speak Your Truth. It's doing well. You've heard positive feedback on it. What's next for you, Kath?
Well, look, this advocacy work, and the more I work with organisations, I would love to be able to donate more time to centres against sexual assault and work fundamentally with family violence organisations to help raise awareness about the prevalence of abuse. So that'll be something that I do in as an advocate myself, to give back to a community that I think is damaged and needs all the voices that they can find. So I see that both the things I'm doing align. One of them I get paid for, and the other one I want to do because it feels like soul's work.
Love this. I love this. I want to thank you for being a guest on the show today and being so vulnerable with your story. And so people at home, you can find the book pretty much everywhere online, from what I can see.
It's on
You can order.
Amazon, Booktopia, so all over the place. And if you're in Australia, it's on my website as well. But don't do that if you're overseas. It'll cost too much in postage. But so I think Amazon's probably the safest bet. And it's also, I've narrated the story myself. So if anyone on Spotify, you can purchase it on Spotify and listen to the audio book, and also Apple Books. So if you're more of a listener than a reader, then by all means, I've threaded all my poetry through, so it's quite a beautiful listen, and it's about 6 hours, so it's not too long.
Maybe you'll be my first audiobook.
Do.
I've never been into audiobooks because I love to read. That's my passion, is to read books. I just love getting lost in them and people's stories, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, like learning and growing and that sort of thing. So I've never actually sat and listened to a whole book on audio before. So
that's my challenge for you. And, I do suggest to people that, some of it's pretty heavy going. I'm very conscious of looking after the audience in the way that I tell my story, but it's still conceptually a pretty difficult topic to digest. So it's a nice book to listen to in nature, walking, so that you can shift the emotions that arise for yourself at the same time without them getting stuck. So I think that's why I'm passionate about it being something that people can hear, because then there's movement happening at the same time that'll help shift some and allow some awareness to come through for individuals.
Amazing. All right, so you're going to go out there and find the book, whether it's audio on Spotify and Apple, and then your best bet, as Kath has said, is probably to go to Amazon for the paperback. Is it in a hardcover as well?
It's a hardcover. It's a beautiful book. Yes, it feels strong, and also come and follow me on Instagram and LinkedIn. So
I'm going to link the book and your socials in the description here when the podcast comes out, so that people can find you easily. I always find that's very important. And I don't know if I said this already, but I'll link the book as well, so that it's quick for people to get. I'm like, what was that? Quick for people to get to. That said, though, I always have to be cognizant of, I have listeners predominantly in the US. However, I do have listeners that are in Australia. I have listeners that are in different parts of the world. And I always find that very fascinating, as just someone who podcasts to connect with people and to hear really great stories of adversity, and then how people find their own definition of success. Like, that to me is the best thing in the world. So finding out that people are listening to me, around the globe, that's bizarre. And I hope never gets old, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So always stay humble. So once again, thank you for being here. Go follow Kath on Instagram. It is Bespeak Consultancy. So BE Speak, like I am right now, and then consultancy. And then that's Instagram. That's Facebook, sorry. On Instagram, it's /Kath, KATH _Essing, ESSING, which I will also link as well. Grab the book, The Courage to Speak Your Truth. Can they also grab the original book, Journey to Self? Is that still up and around?
No. I've got a few copies still at home, but I've discontinued that. I think, that I've outgrown the content that I shared, and I've grown so much since that I'll be ready to do a new book in another few years. But no, the first one is no longer. This one is the one that I've poured my whole heart and soul into.
Okay, perfect. Maybe it's a Journey to Self Volume 2.
Mm-hmm.
You never know, right?
Maybe.
Once again, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time, and I wish you the very best success in your advocacy. And thank you for what you're doing. We need more of it. We need people to find their voices and tell their truths.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. All the best, Kath.
For media and sponsorship inquiries, email info@cksims.com or visit cksims.com and fill out the contact form. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. A new episode airs every Saturday. CKS Media.